What is up, Internet? Welcome to season 2 of Self-Defense from All Angles, episode number 2. This week we have on the show my friend Anna. She is a specialist in disaster management. She started working with the government and now teaches at a university here in Alberta about this topic. This was a fantastic conversation. We talk about the pillars of disaster management. We talk about what you should have in your kit for the 72 hours. We talk about the second disaster, which is donations, and I share my own personal anecdotes of what happens after our fire. We really hammer on the importance of community, and if you've been following me for long enough, you know that I really believe that community is one of the most effective forms of self-protection, and it just doubles down on that and explains how community is so important. And of course, on the Patreon story, Anna shares a anecdote of when she was working an actual disaster for the Alberta government, and she talks about some factors of collateral damage that most people don't think about when it comes to disaster management. I highly recommend you check out the show. It was fantastic. I learned a lot, and she busts some myths that surround disaster management that I think are really important things to know. I know I didn't know them, so maybe you don't either. And of course, don't forget, if you are looking for someone to come and talk to your people wherever they are about violence prevention, conflict management, personal protection, get a hold of us, randykinglive.com or 8020cms.com. We will come to your site or teach online. Let's get to the show. What is up, Internet? Welcome to the second episode of season 2 of Self-Defense from All Angles, the podcast where we try to break the echo chamber of self-defense. We are here talking to people who work in crisis management, violence prevention, but people that are not necessarily martial arts coaches. So I really think this show is important because we're getting more raw information about protection and crisis management and all those things that happen outside of just kick, punch, choke, right? So because self-defense is a much larger animal than just the physical skills. This week on the show, we have my friend Anna. Anna, welcome to the show.
Hi, so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I really appreciate it because your job is super interesting and I'm really excited to talk to you. When you reached out, like, I've never been on a podcast. I'm like, goddamn perfect. That's awesome. So Anna, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Anna. I've been working disaster and emergency management for well over 10 years. So you might be like, what is disaster and emergency management? During a normal emergency, you think of a house fire. So that means, like, say, police, ambulance, fire shows up and takes care of it. What happens if that entire block, neighborhood, city is on fire? That's where emergency management shows up. But we are the ones that can help coordinate the response that's happening to when things really go sideways. It's a disaster. We're trying to coordinate to protect life, safety, environment, property, to make sure that things don't progress and get even worse. So that's my job. So I've been doing this for a long time. I've done it with a nonprofit, with the government. I teach in the NAIT Diploma program for disaster and emergency management, and I also do some consulting, so to help municipalities and different organizations create their emergency management plans and training, lots of training. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and what disaster emergency management is.
That's awesome. So if I could just boil that down, what you do is the macro version of emergency planning, not the micro version.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's correct. So for me, because I had a house fire in 2019, all the stuff around the house fire, that wouldn't be you. But if that fire spread to other buildings or if infrastructure was affected, that kind of stuff. So like earthquake, tornado, that sort of stuff.
That's exactly it. So some of the stuff I've worked on is the Fort McMurray fire in 2016, Southern Alberta Floods of 2013. Just, it's Alberta. So lots of fires, lots of fires.
So many fires in the
prairies. Lots of flooding, lots of fires. Emergency management is when whoever it's supposed to deal with it. So one fire, it overwhelms whoever's supposed to be dealing with that one fire. That's when disaster emergency management really kicks in, and that's when your emergency plans start activating. So during COVID, for example, that's it's obviously a disaster, right? It's a worldwide pandemic. So that's a little bit more of the business continuity and crisis management side, because we're trying to make sure that things are continuing to work, but it's no longer a normal situation. It's overwhelming things. So back during when COVID first hit, I worked with Alberta Environment that we're regulating water, for example. So now we're trying to think business continuity and crisis. What happens if this pandemic, back then we didn't know anything about COVID, if you remember back early 2020. So what happens is this is so bad that we no longer have drinking water operators able to process our water.
That's really interesting. I think that's why I'm glad to have you on the show, because it's something that people don't think about, right? When we think about emergency planning, we think about the bug out bag and the, like have 3 days worth of this or that. And very, like we say, prepper type mentality, survivalist, whatever you want to call it. And we had one on the show. If you haven't heard, go to episode like 14 or 15 of season 1, Rogue Preparedness with Morgan Rogue. She had a great tips for beginning to get ready for disaster. When it comes to what you do, is there anything you would like people to know or have or be ready with? Like, what would make your job easier, especially when you're dealing with large numbers of people?
Yeah, disaster preparedness is the number one thing. Having community involvement and personal involvement is the best way to create a resilient community. And research has shown that the more prepared and resilient a community is, the better it will be prepared. So get to know your neighbors. Like, just honestly, like really little steps. Who are they? Talk to them. So like 88-year-old grandma lives down the street and suddenly you have no power and she relies on stuff. Right. You can go help her. If you are an able-bodied individual, you can go. That's the kind of community involvement that it's needed in a disaster. Because let's be honest, you will be the first responder in an emergency. When Vancouver earthquake hits, it's going to be the people there that are going to be the first responders. If Gertrude down the street needs some help, like you are able to provide that. Like during large things like Katrina, for example, the communities that were able to that had that sense of community are able to bounce back better. And having, of course, the disaster preparedness that you hear about all the time, having your food, water, being able to be self-reliant for 72 hours, obviously very important. And it's something that we do talk about a lot, that emergency preparedness. But honestly, what we see in research is get to know your neighbors, have that sense of community. Your local government wants you to know about their emergency plans. This is not a government conspiracy. They want you to know, they want you to be active. They want to share that, because you know what? That's how we build community resilience. And community resilience is how we're able to be better prepared and respond to and recover from a disaster.
I know you've been focused on community, and I think it's so important. When I'm teaching courses, one of the things I say is have a strong community. Going to the very micro level to what I teach for like self-defense and self-protection is if you have good self-worth, good boundaries, and a good community, the odds of you getting selected by a predator drop exponentially, because predators especially go towards marginalized communities, places where people don't care, places where people can disappear and nobody knows, right? So Gertrude down the street, if you don't know her and she drops out of a heart attack, you might not know she's down until you smell the body, right? So other than getting to know your neighbors, because I really believe that a strong sense of community is like number one for self-protection, especially living in the age of impending nuclear threat and all the stress that's happening on the planet right now. Like, what do you recommend to do to get to know your neighbors? Like you said, like just go talk to them, but is there anything else you suggest to people on how to do this? Do you get any, and also the second question, do you get any resilience to, like, I don't want to go meet my neighbors? Like when you talk to people, like, I don't want to talk to anybody in my apartment building.
That is a really tricky question, because join community groups. Like here in Edmonton, we have community leagues. Join your community league, right? If you don't want to talk to people in person, at least join a Facebook group, right? So that way you're a little bit more aware of what's going on around. I know, like in my community league Facebook page, our city councilor is very active in it. So just get to know that kind of stuff, any kind of events happening in the community, like even if you just attend, you're able to get some information. For example, the second week of May is Emergency Preparedness Week. Lots of events always happen, like in Edmonton and throughout Canada. Lots of events happen, and you don't have to talk to anyone, but there's going to be information there, right? Like Edmonton usually has a Get Ready in the Park in Horilac Park. Calgary, there's disaster rally happening too. Like lots of St. Albert does events. Like little communities, big communities, they all do events. You don't need to talk to people. There's brochures. Take them home. But at least you'll know what is going on in your community. You maybe you can start getting to start build that buffer.
For Emergency Planning Week, is that something that happens, like, is it international? Is that just Canada?
It's in Canada. A lot different countries do different things. Like I actually don't know if the U.S. does Emergency Preparedness Week, but Emergency Preparedness Week is the second week of May every single year, all throughout Canada, where communities, large and small, so from your local government all the way to the national government, which is it is a public safety initiative. Actually, it's to be able to create that information and awareness about what happens in an emergency, who does what, because
Right.
the government might not always be there to save you.
Well, and I think that's, so not to get too far, swing the other way, but it's always good to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, right? So
You
the
just
government
summed
won't
up my
help.
job, Randy.
Is that your job pretty much? So first thing I want to say is to my international listeners, because we're all over the world, people listen to this, look up if there's an emergency planning week in your community, in your country, in whatever, because I didn't know that was a thing. And now I'm going to attend it this year because it seems like something smart. Going on the can't really rely on X amount of people in these environments, I think that's something good to think about, but not something you should base your entire life off of, because you're going to get a little bit too crazy or paranoid. But I do like the self-reliance part. I do like the, like you mentioned earlier, you are the first responder. You are the person who is going to be there first, right? When we had the fire happen, I tried to put it out with a jug of water. It didn't work. It was already too big. And then it was, okay, then the next step was get to the fire alarm. Then it was go knock on doors when people woke up, et cetera, et cetera. I want you to tell listeners, how important is it for people to have an emergency plan, like a fire escape plan or any kind of disaster plan? Like, how important is disaster planning for the regular person?
Absolutely, very important. And if you go to any of the Emergency Preparedness Week events, you will get lots of templates, brochures, and ideas on what to do to create your own emergency preparedness plan. So essentially, how do you get out of your community? Like, if your house is on fire, how do you get out? What should you have? Say your entire little cul-de-sac is on fire. That means your way in and out is gone. What happens if something happens, like you're at home and something happens at the kids? Like, how do you get there if you have no car, for example? We live in a very car driven society, right? So thinking about all those things, having hard copies of certain documents, right? All of that stuff, it's part of your emergency preparedness plan. Having cash. Say the power goes out. Say we I don't know, we got a solar wave or something, and now you can't use your tap. We all love our tap, but now there's no tap. Like, having cash on hand. So lots of different places you can go to get all of these resources. Public Safety Canada does provide a lot of really great places to be able to access how to create your own personal preparedness plan. FEMA also has a lot of that. Like, any national government will have your personal preparedness safe information for you to be able to access.
Well, I think that's super important. So, funny story about the fire is, in the old building we were in, the fire alarm used to go off a lot, like all the time. And it made my daughter a little bit paranoid because my daughter's a planner. So we actually, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, awkwardly close, we came up with a emergency kit for our rabbit. So we're like, we should have a little bag with food and litter and whatever, and just in case something bad happens. And I cannot stress how quickly we had that bag, how quickly the rabbit was in the bag. And that's the only reason the rabbit survived. We didn't have a plan for the lizard died. We didn't have a plan for the fish died. We definitely went mammal priority, but the just having that little plan, just having that repetition of okay, this is what we're going to do in this situation, it literally saved that rabbit's life.
Absolutely. Most people don't really understand that just having that written down or having even talked about it increases the chance that you'll actually do it. Even studies have shown that if you listen and read the little pamphlet when you go in an airplane that nobody listens to, everybody tunes out, you're more likely to survive. If you have a plan to know how to get out of your neighborhood, you're more likely to get out. Like, all of these things, they get promoted for a reason, and the reason is because it works.
Yeah. I use the airplane analogy all the time. When we talk about self-defense, we talk about freezing. Your brain gets overwhelmed by, certain things that happen in a high impact event in your life, right? The reason to do the safety dance, even seeing it one time under stress, your brain has something to go to, right? Because you're not in your critical thinking part of your brain under stress. You are in your habit and ritual part of your brain.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you do say that too, because part of my job is like, well, not with NAIT, but like as a consultant, is to create exercises for people. So, as a legislated mandate, a lot of organizations have to exercise their plans. And how the heck do you do that? You practice, like that's how you're able to improve. So when things do happen, you're like, oh wait, I've done this before. I can do this. You practice for the worst, because that way it starts, like, you create those training wheels, and you're right, when things do happen, you're able to actually act out on it. So when I was with the government, so Fort McMurray happened in 2016, and every year, again, by legislative mandate, the province has to do an exercise. And that year, the big exercise was actually a big wildfire that caused an evacuation of a major city. So here we go, right? So you apply those lessons and you improve. But the thing is about improving, right? A few months before Katrina hit, there was Hurricane Pam. You don't know about Hurricane Pam because it was not real. It was an exercise. People all over FEMA, all over the parishes in Louisiana, New Orleans, practice a Category 4 hitting straight on New Orleans. Everything was very realistic. Flooding, levees breaking, hospitals, everything. None of the lessons were applied. And everything that happened in the scenario of Hurricane Pam actually happened. And people are like, yeah. So like practicing is important, but also applying what you've learned is important.
Well, I agree. And again, going back to this being a self-defense podcast, we talk about that all the time, right? You can't talk your way through a physical skill. You have to actually do the thing, right? So whether if visualization is your best option, then visualize it. You're going to get at least some kind of, I like the term training wheels. That's going to put the training wheels into your head. I'm definitely stealing that. But also like being aware that bad stuff can happen. I think that's where a lot of people, they hit that psychological part that freeze in their brain because they don't think this stuff is going to happen to them. I remember after the fire, habit and ritual, I grabbed my water bottle and my laptop because my life's work is on my laptop. And every day I leave the house, I grab my water bottle. So my family made fun of me. They were like, special water bottle? Why did you save that? I'm like, I didn't save it. It's just when I leave the house, I always grab it. So I just went into habit and ritual because I didn't have anything else. When we look at this, I'm going to say entitlement, not in a bad way, but we live in a world where we expect services now. We have DoorDash and we have like, oh my God, the Uber driver delivers my food to me from my phone was 4 minutes late. I'm going to complain, right? Like we live in this place where we're flying through the sky like gods. We're like, they have bad movies. Like we're insane as a people. What are some of the services I think that people should, you think that people should avoid during disaster management? Like if you're not hurt, going to a hospital is not a good idea, right? Is there things you suggest that people do, or like a list of priorities they should go through in a disaster?
In a disaster, if you are ever in, say you're listening from the West Coast and you know the big one is coming.
Right.
And know that if you have a broken arm on the side of the road, don't take it personally when the fire department drives past you. They are trained to go to ignore the 5-year-old with a broken arm on the side of the road because they got to deal with that big building down the street. And even though the guidance is 72 hours, it might be more. So make sure that you are going to be okay with that. If you're an able-bodied person, make sure that you're going to be able to know where to get your water, where to get some food. If you don't have a kit, make sure that you have a way. We're all very reliant on these phones.
Yes.
Right? Know some numbers. Because we have that Facebook I'm safe button. You're not gonna have that. Have a plan. You brought up a good point with your bunny. Know what you're gonna do with your pets. When I worked for Fort McMurray during the fire, there were a lot of pets left behind.
Sure.
A lot of pets needed to get rescued. And honestly, like you're not just talking about the cute bunnies. You're talking about people's like 15 feet anacondas or whatever it was. Trust me, the firefighters don't want to deal with your 15-foot snake.
That's fair.
Yeah, so make sure you think about your pets. And if you need emergency shelter because you have nowhere else to go, they don't allow pets.
Right.
That's just a health. It's a human safety, health hazard, right? Just kind of, there's food there. Pets aren't allowed.
I think I didn't even know that. We were very lucky. I have a large friend network, so I didn't really suffer too much after the fire. And we had insurance, so it took care of a lot of it. I didn't know they didn't allow pets in emergency shelters. That would be crazy. And especially if you like are really connected to your dog or cat, that's going to cause some extra stress on you that you don't have your animals.
Absolutely. And a lot of people will refuse to evacuate because of their pets. That was a big thing. Again, looking back through some major disasters here in Alberta and just like the big ones like Katrina again, people will refuse to evacuate because they don't want to either evacuate without their pets or they don't have anywhere to go with their pets. So knowing what to do with Fido or the cat or bunny or 15-foot snake, making sure you have a solid plan for them.
Yeah, and if you're one of those people who has too many pets to carry, like even the rabbit in the bag that we had was still trying to get out. He's like, freedom, I'm outside finally, right? I'm like, dude, you're gonna die. I want to go back to your thing about know some numbers. I think that's insane that people don't, because we grew up in a generation where you remember numbers, but the kids don't. That is such a good piece of advice, not even for disaster management, but also in self-defense. Because if you're in a self-defense situation, you might spend some time in handcuffs. And the first thing they do is take your phone away from you. So when they're like, you get a phone call, they don't give you your phone to make the phone call. You have to make a phone call on a public phone. So if you don't know your lawyer's number, your mom's number, your whoever's going to come bail you out of jail number, like that's bad, right? We've seen people go through getting arrested after self-defense. They righteously defended themselves, and they're like, okay, you get a phone call. And they're like, well, can I have my phone? They're like, absolutely no, you cannot have your phone. What are you talking about? There could be evidence on there. It's in a bag in the back. They're like, I don't know any numbers. They're like, you get the right to a phone call. That's where we stop. It's not our right to tell you what the numbers are. They're not going to look through your phone for you. So have some key numbers memorized is just, I think, across the board, a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. Like I have numbers memorized, but that's because of I'm an elderly millennial. I still use the little like spinning thing on phones, right? But most people, like even other millennials, right? And Jen said definitely doesn't know any phone numbers, and that's just the way that is. So make sure you have at least one number. One number outside of 911.
Right. Yeah, I think that's such good advice. Like memorize a number, know how to dial it. Also, fun fact, you should practice opening your phone when your hands are shaking because people can't even get access to their phone when they're under adrenaline. So there's a whole bunch of things, again, we take for granted, right? Like, oh, my phone will always have access. If you're in like you said, a solar flare and all the phones go down, now what? Like, do you even know the address of where your friend, do you know how to get there without Google Maps? Because I know a lot of people that they don't know how to get anywhere. They turn their phone on, they go into robot mode and they appear. Where's the hospital? How close is the fire station? You can't Google these things. You need to know this stuff.
Yeah. And again, that's where that sense of community also comes in, right? Like, so like if I'm trying to go somewhere like, oh, like, I know like Susan across the street, like they may be able to help me or like whatever. Like if you don't know a number, at least know somebody you can physically get to that might be able to help you.
Have a good sense of community so you can knock on your neighbor's door and be like, hey, remember me? I'm not some random person during a disaster. Like this isn't The Walking Dead and humans are the villain. Like I'm here to help you, right? I'm here to in some way or ask for help. And then, it's you don't want to ask for help cold, right? Like, oh, I've never met you before, but can I use your phone? They're like, I don't know. I saw on the news things are going bad.
I saw this on Dateline somewhere.
Exactly. I've watched every zombie movie. Humans are not great. 72 hours. You mentioned that 72 hours was like that magic number. Why is that the suggested number? And what should people have for that 72 hours?
72 hours is the suggested number. That is the time that emergency resources are going to try their best to get to you. It might be sooner. It might not. So that's the number you have to be reliant for. So the things that you should have, say that you're stuck in an ice storm, the power is out, you're literally snowed in, like you should have enough water, food, can openers. People forget can opener. They buy all the cans and they forget the can opener. Got the can opener. Again, some cash just in case because there's no power. You can't tap your way out of it.
Right.
Blankets. Just some big candles, either a crank radio or a battery radio with fresh and extra batteries because most people forget to check their emergency kits. A good way that you're supposed to check them is during daylight savings time because that's twice a year, right? So that way you check, make sure the batteries still work, the food hasn't expired, the mice haven't eaten through your blankets. Candles, something to entertain yourself with, because again, we're very reliant on technology. Like, just turn on Netflix, like I'll just do my Wordle, like whatever. You won't have that. So get a book, get a board game, get something, and candles to be able to see your way through things. Just literally the basic things that you would go through in a day: water, drinking water, and cooking water too, in case you have none and the water's gone out. Toilet paper, as we've learned from 2020, we need toilet paper.
Toilet paper, apparently very important, very, very important.
Very important. Food for your pet. Don't forget your pets. Remember, I think like your cats will eat you or something like that. So make sure that they don't go hungry. Just basic things that you will need to survive. So like papers in case you need to like copies of your driver's license,
Right.
copies of your insurance. If you can't remember the numbers, have them written down. So somewhere where you can get to them. All of that kind of stuff.
I think the two biggest pullouts I want to repeat in there for the listeners is, number one, make daylight savings time, if your country observes that, make that your time to check your emergency preparedness stuff. I think that's a good link. Obviously you're a pro, so that's why you suggest it, but I've never heard that before. And I think it's very intelligent to have that. And the other thing that Morgan talked about is that entertainment thing. People, they just plan for it, then they're just going to sit there bored and cranky, especially young children, right? Like, you got to keep them distracted, especially during a disaster. From a person who's been in 2 different house fires in his life, the stress level that comes from that, just like the overarching stress of it, is so much. If you don't have distraction, you don't have comforts, if you don't have food for your pet and your cat's meowing your face off while you're going through a fire, like, you're not going to be your best self, right? You're not going to be optimal human at this time, because just there's so many levels of stress. I think, yeah, I love the checking, and I think it needs to be repeated a lot to people that don't live in this world, is don't just plan for survival, plan for living, right? Plan for living a couple of days.
Yeah. Like, don't just be like, food, water, shelter, we're good. Like,
right, we good.
You're gonna be cranky AF, man. Like, get a book, at least a book. And yeah, like things for kids. So if you have a baby, have formula that's not expired, all of that kind of stuff.
What are some things you've seen or heard that are like myths in the disaster management? Is there anything like that in your field?
Absolutely. And we actually do talk about that in some of our intro courses. They are open studies, so you don't even need to be part of our diploma program if people are interested in taking some of those courses.
Cool.
Disaster myths, there's lots of them, like looting. People always think there's going to be lots of looting, better arm yourself to protect yourself. History, research, studies, there's not a lot of looting.
Really?
There's a lot of community support. People, instead of, if they are looting, it's because they're really like, grandma needs her insulin.
So that's a myth that I believe 100% that looting was going to happen. And that's literally like my number one thing. Everybody's like, I'm going to go get this. I'm like, I have to go to a pharmacy. I take a thyroid pill that keeps me alive. So I'm going to go rob the fuck out of that place as fast as possible. Right? So I'm planning to loot, but that's because they're only giving me X amount of survival pills, right? So I think that's really interesting. What else?
That there's going to be so massive social disorder or panic. There's going to be lots of panic. And you know what? Again, history and studies have shown us that people, like, even look at 9/11, you would think, oh shit, like there's a plane that just crashed into our building. Panic. There wasn't. There was a very orderly evacuation of the building, people helping people. Right. That is what you see. And that is what you see in disasters. During Fort McMurray, we saw Alberta strong, Fort McMurray strong, people helping people. There was no panic. There was like frustration trying to evacuate. Yes, but there was no panic. There's, again, that sense of community. Southern Alberta Floods. Yes, people were scared. They were like nervous. They were like, my house, but there wasn't panic. People don't panic. Like, as long as they have clear communication, people are able to speak, tell them exactly the situation. This is what is happening. This is what we need to do. People don't panic. You don't get that mass panic that you see in the movies. Like, again, like think 9/11. That's the best example, I think, right? You would have thought in the movies, it would have been massive panic.
Yeah.
That's not what we saw. It was a calm evacuation of building and people helping people.
Interesting. So again, going back, that sense of community is so important. I don't know if there's any other myths, but I just want to kind of point out here from the first 2 I've heard is the myth is people become terrible under these events. And what you're seeing is people actually unite under these events.
Absolutely. Yeah. We create that we create almost like a mini instant micro community of like we are on the first tower, like, oh my God, but like the elevators are out, but Bill's in a wheelchair. People help Bill down carry like the stuff to help Bill down the stairs. Like people help the evacuation. And then in real communities, right? You're like, Gertrude like is not going to be able to get out of her house. Like we need to go help her. Like that sense of community, that really comes through and shines, right? Like again, look at the Southern Alberta floods. After that massive 1 in 100-year flood decimated certain communities, what happened? There was everyone from Calgary came and helped with the cleanup. Self-organized volunteer groups came and helped. Oh yeah, like it was like a thing. Like City of Calgary had to set up things to be like, this is what you need to do if you're coming in here because this water had sewage in it.
Right.
Get that people helping people community.
Well, that reignites my faith in humanity a little bit. I definitely lean towards that. All I do is read studies of horrific things happening to people, and it's nice to hear some good news in that, especially with disaster management.
And I mean, there is anger, but the anger comes much afterwards, right? The anger will there's always the anger that will come after something big. Fort McMurray, there was obviously anger, but that doesn't happen in the immediate after. During the response, I guess I should rewind. So in emergency management, we have a few pillars. We have preparedness, so that's where we do our training and plans. Mitigation, that's where we build our flooding mitigation, right? So things like fire breaks for wildfire, etc. Response, that's where poop hits the fan. And then your recovery, so that's when you're trying to go back to where you used to be.
Sure.
So in the response, you don't really have the anger. You have the community, the sense of rebuilding. Let's try to help Joe back up onto his feet, but all of that stuff. Like Joe is looking for his bunnies. Let's help. Let's see what we can do. The anger comes in the recovery phase.
That is so interesting to me. It makes sense. And when you walk it out logically, I'm like, yeah, duh. But it's just not what I think people would expect in those situations, right? It's, again, we're thinking the disaster movie, everybody's going to turn, every man for themselves, kind of push them down. Like, oh, there's a guy in a wheelchair. Sucks to be you, Wheels. See you later, right? It seems like that's what it is. And you're seeing from the studies and the information, and you're just not seeing that.
That's exactly it. You don't see that. What we see again, in small disasters, I'm sure you even saw this after your own fire, right? Yeah. People want to help. Yeah. People are like, oh my God, and you see that in the larger scale too. You see all of that, people opening their homes. For McMurray, they're again, as part of the government response, people one time somebody called our emergency social services team, which is the ones in charge of putting people somewhere with emergency shelter. And oh, I have got 30 people here, but I'm out of houses. And we're like, who are you? And it was somebody that literally took it upon themselves to start billeting people in different homes.
Right.
When I worked in more local responses here in Edmonton, we would see somebody would post one thing on Facebook, little Sally just lost her home and now she has no shirts to wear tomorrow to school. And the next thing little Sally knew, she would have 100, 300 shirts because the community was like, oh my God, that won't do.
Right. So and I think I agree. And so from my fire, one of my sayings now is not all help is helpful, in that if people don't know what the plan is and they just help by default, the amount of toothpaste and socks that we had was unnecessary for any human for their whole lifetime. But people just helped without asking. Right. And so not all help is helpful in this. So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. That is actually a huge thing. Donation management. So for everyone listening, please, if you want to help after a disaster, if you're not impacted, but you're seeing people from I don't know, rural Bill, wherever, and you want to help, don't send them things. Give them money.
Yeah.
That is what they need. That if you want to help, don't know where to send the money, send it to Red Cross. Red Cross is always there helping out in big things that make the news like that. Donation management is generally called the second disaster.
Yeah. Interesting.
So there was a Slave Lake fire here in 2011. We had literally trailers and trailers and trailers of actual garbage that people donated, like
Right.
filled with mouse poop, disgusting things, like
Gross.
really gross things that people are like trying to be old couches, like just again, it's a secondary disaster because now your logistics team, instead of like trying to focus on the actual disaster, is trying to work on all this crap.
Right. And as a person that's gone through it, like you said, there was an overwhelming community support. That's what I experienced as well. And I think that the hardest thing is people be like, well, what do you need? And you're like, I don't know what I just lost everything. I'm not in the state where I could be like, well, we could use 4 forks. Like, it's just, I'm not at that place. And so I had to tell people, you need to let me tell you how to help me and not just assume, because like, I don't need another pair. I do not need a pair of socks for the rest of my life. We have so many socks. I'm not joking. Socks were the overwhelming. I don't know if everybody read like the same article and like, in a disaster, you forget socks, but so many pairs of socks.
I genuinely actually don't know why. I can't help you with that one.
It was just strange, but I love how you phrase it, that it's the second disaster, because like I said, not all help is helpful and everybody's trying to do stuff, but they're giving you stuff that you already have or stuff that you never needed in the first place, right? And so it's hard as the person going through the crisis, unless you have training in this, right? Like you've been in firefights, you have training like you have, to know like exactly what you need, right? When you're like, I don't know what I need, but I know I don't need more socks. I know that as a fact. Yeah.
You'll hear about things in the news being like, oh my God, the government has turned down like little old granny, trying to give them cookies. How dare they? And there's a reason behind that. We don't know if granny washes her hands.
Right. That's a fair point.
Right? Like we're turning down people trying to give clothes. It's like, yes, yeah, we are, because we're giving them actual money to go buy the clothes they want, not just taking your old pair of pants that even you don't want. Right. So like, you already had a disaster. Don't inflict that on them, man.
Don't inflict your fashion disaster on their actual disaster.
Like, so yeah, anyone listening, if you take nothing else, please don't donate things. Donate money.
Yeah. And money was by far the most helpful thing, right? So you can go and get stuff and you can stay at a hotel, you can go out, or like the last thing you want to do after that is like cook and do laundry. Like those are not those like mundane things that suck. They're not great after a disaster.
No, absolutely.
Anna, this was a fantastic episode. So what's going to happen next is we're going to jump over to Patreon. I'm going to ask you for a story in disaster management. It only exists behind the paywall at the $5 level on Patreon. That's how this show makes money, is we put the cool stories behind a paywall. Anna, you work for NAIT. If anybody is interested in this field, how do they get into it?
We have a diploma program. If you're in right now, currently it's not open for anyone internationally, so I'm sorry about that. But if you're in Canada, we do have a diploma in disaster and emergency management. It is a 2-year program. We start in September, so you can check us out online on NAIT.ca, disaster and emergency management. So I'm obviously a little bit biased, but we have the best program in Canada for a diploma start program to start. We'll be able to help you all the way along the way, and we have a very high success rate on employable students afterwards, and that's because we work with actual industry partners to make sure that we are providing students with the real life skills they need to be successful in this field. If you're only just interested in learning more about it, maybe you not sure if you want to take the program, we have 2 courses that are open studies so that you can start your way to learn more about disaster and emergency management as a profession through that. So again, NAIT.ca.
Awesome. All right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the show, episode 2. Next week, we have a lady coming on the show, Maggie, who's talking about leaving the Mormon church and all of the horrific things that happened on that route. So that should be a pretty interesting episode. And don't forget, as always, jump over to patreon.com for the story after the show, and randykinglive.com if you have any interest in hiring me for any event for your business. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.